Hello. So good evening, everyone. Today we have with us Prashant Panjiar, who is a very well-known photojournalist, a very good curator, and he's been a photo editor at Outlook. When we had discussions over an email with regards to what kind of a structure there should be for this evening, Prashant said that there shouldn't be any structure. It has to be in the true nature of a conversation. And yet, I had made my plans. So I had prepared a list of questions that I was going to ask him. But Prashant, being a good photojournalist, must have seen through the deceit. And this morning he said, let's do one thing. Let's talk about Gandhi. So all my plans have now gone down the drain, and we'll start with Kanu Gandhi's work. Now this is one exhibition that Prashant has curated and which has resulted into a publication which we'll be talking about. And the other thing that we'll show is my book, 23 Grams of Salt. And Prashant wants to know a few things about that. We'll be conversing on that. And I don't know where that will lead us. If anyone in the audience wants to ask questions, even in between, please feel free. We'll show you some pictures of both the works so that you have an idea with regards to what we are talking about. We'll quickly run through the slideshow, and then I'll invite Prashant on the stage and we'll carry on the conversation. Thank you.
I really thought, because Anuj has done this wonderful book on tracing the Dandi March and Gandhi's journey. And I've worked for a long time on this book, on Kanu Gandhi and the work, that this should be a good starting point for this conversation, because it's something that is also talks about the nature of personal and documentary photography in a certain time and now. And maybe we can take lessons from there. And people, after that, once we do that part of the conversation, like Anuj said, it would be great to have any questions about anything from anyone, about photography, about documentary photography, about both our works or photojournalism, whatever you feel like asking. But I think this might set the tone for it.
So Prashant, can you start with how you came up with this project, the archives, Kanu Gandhi archives?
Well, we're going to speak in English, but if you prefer, we can mix it up, Hindi and English. Mix kar bole? Okay. Huh? So I was working in Outlook in 1998. In that time, 1998 was 50th anniversary of Gandhi's death. And as usual, Outlook we were planning a special issue. And I used to be one of the editors. I was the picture editor. I was also one of the deputy editors of the magazine. And I used to always take a lot of major role in the special issues. So, वो usual plan था कि, there'll be a number of stories and articles and photo essay and this, that. And one of the big stories was on the progeny of Gandhi, various people from his family, what they're doing now. तो उसमें कई लोगों को contact किया गया, and Gopal Gandhi, who was the press secretary to the president at that time, I went to meet him to ask him that I want to come and photograph him. And it was a December evening, late December ki baat hai, and we were sitting in this huge room of his in the Rashtrapati Bhavan. And he said, the progeny of Gandhi is of no use. I mean, there's no point. Gandhi is not interested in that, and I don't want to participate in it, And I don't think you should be doing that story in any case. फिर ऐसी बात होती रही, then it was one of those winter evenings, and then he looked out of the window and he said, turned and said, it was exactly this kind of time, it was 5 something in the evening and the same kind of light and day when Gandhi was assassinated. So, and then he kept quiet for some time. Then he said, why don't you go and, have you ever been to Birla House where Gandhi was killed? And having lived in Delhi, I'd never been there, So he said, see, this is what happened. He said, when Mandela came for the first time after becoming president, usko Rajghat bhej rahe the to do the usual Rajghat thing. And he said, no. And he used to never call Gandhi Mahatma Gandhi. He'd say, Gandhi. He says, I want to go to Birla House and see where Gandhi lived, So anyway, so he said, and he gave a brilliant idea. He said, why don't you go and meet the people who were witness to his assassination, or who lived through that moment. And he shared some contacts and actually went and did the story. That time only I'd been thinking of this I'd got to know about Kanu Gandhi's work, that someone had an archive, and I was searching for it, and he told me that, look, where you were looking in London, there's that, vagara, vagara. There's a family lives in Rajkot. You go and meet them. And he pointed me in the right direction, and that's how I came in 1998, met the family, saw the material, the negatives, and they met me in Bombay, and we printed the pictures for the first time, published it, and after that, a long association started with the family. And that's how I was very clear in my mind when we should do a major exhibition, and then we did that exhibition with the Delhi Photo Festival, and then said we must do a book. And that's how this book came about. It's almost, by the time 1998 to 2015 is a long time, but it happened that way. That is how, so it's a long interest in this.
Having looked at these pictures, by the way, this is the book that we are talking about, that exhibition. As a part of that exhibition, this book got published?
Well, first the exhibition happened, and then the book was published.
So this book, I think, is probably the best book on pictures of Gandhi that I've seen. And so I would love to know more about the design of this book. What were the thoughts? One thing that I noticed is that there's a certain kind of elegance in this book and it in a way kind of connects me with the elegance that one associates with Gandhi. Though Gandhi never did things for elegance, but it comes out that way.
Yeah. So I don't know if many of you know about Kanu Gandhi. Do आप लोग जानते हैं Kanu Gandhi के बारे में? Well, so this is interesting. Wo backstory, and I think that will also answer the question. Kanu Gandhi was Gandhi's great grandnephew, and he came at the age of 10 years old. When he was 10 years old, came to the ashram, to Sabarmati, to live with Gandhi, and he used to with his parents, and who were also in the ashram. Uske baad he was supposed to become a doctor, but he didn't want to do medicine. And when Gandhi shifted to Wardha, he went with him. By that time, he was a slightly younger person. And by that time, look, international press, media, people used to come meet Gandhi, photograph him, etc., etc. And Kanu Gandhi was known as within the family circle as Hanuman, because he was Gandhi ke bedding uthakar jata tha. He used to sing bhajans with Kasturba, and he was part of that family setup. He developed an interest in photography. तो उसने जाकर गांधी जी से कहा कि मुझे फोटोग्राफी करनी है. तो गांधी सेट की फोटोग्राफी कैसे करोगे, कुछ यहाँ पर तो पैसे वैसे हैं नहीं कुछ भी. तो ही सेड लेकिन मुझे करना है, बिकॉज सो देन G.D. Birla was visiting at one time, and Gandhi ji went and told G.D. Birla that Ghanshyam Das Birla that यहाँ पर ये कनु हैं, उनको थोड़ी सी कुछ ज़रूरत है फोटोग्राफी. So G.D. Birla gave some 100 rupees, or I forget the exact amount, it's in the book, to कि ऐसे तुम कर लो, कैमरा खरीद लो और फिल्म ले, एक one roll of film. He was able to buy with it, and Gandhi had 3 conditions. He told Kanu Gandhi कि I have 3 conditions. One, you'll never ask me to pose. 2, you will never use a flash. And 3, कि आश्रम के पैसे से नहीं करना तुमको. अपना तुम करो कुछ भी, वो पैसे फोटो किसी को देकर कुछ पैसे कमा कर लो तुम. But unmitigated access to Gandhi. वो inner circle में थे, he was part of the family, and that's how he started photographing. I gave pictures to some publication, and someone gave him some money. So by the time he started was 1938. So actually speaking, these are the pictures that are there in this book, and all of Kanu Gandhi's pictures are of the last 10 years of Gandhi's life. And it's very interesting because he was not a photographer. He was not trained as a photographer, but he had an instinct. And he had a way of photographing which was very pure in a way, you know. Or that's why you saw some of the images. There is something. So we thought that when we were doing the book, now I'm the project curator, but the book itself, the editor of the book is a friend of ours who's also a great photographer, Sanjeev Saith, who's done the sequence and put a narrative in the book. And the designer is Gopika, who we work together a lot of times. So both keeping Gandhi's own way of thinking and his life, and Kanu Gandhi's own kind of simplicity in what he was doing without mystifying it, without making it very dramatic. That's what the design, when you come to, I mean, it's a long way to tell you why the design of the book is in a certain quieter way, you know.
The pictures that are there in the book, one can see them in 2-3 categories. One, there are very formal portraits of Gandhi with a classical source of light coming from one direction, beautiful light falling on the man, even portrait of Nehru, I can recall C.F. Andrews.
Yeah.
So that is one, which is kind of a predictable way of a trained photographer would look at things. And then the other thing that I wish to ask you about are the other pictures. Some of them are so strikingly similar to how a contemporary photographer in 2022 would take pictures.
Yeah.
There's a picture of the Samadhi grounds of Madhav Desai and Kasturba. Now, I saw that picture and I thought that this is the way I would take a picture if I was there. So how do you see that? How do you see Kanu Gandhi, the photographer?
Well, this is what before we had this conversation, and was struck me also about, and I think it's a way to look at, and that's why I think it's very relevant to what we will be talking about in contemporary practice. Here's a person who's a personal chronicler of a big man, a really big personality. He was a personal chronicler. He was an untrained photographer. And by most probably, or Jarur, he was in awe of this man, of Gandhi. After all, he was his grandfather kind of image and a huge personality. He was very close to Kasturba, and I think he could take some liberty, but with Gandhi he was very... So, unlike the photojournalists who would rush in close to take a picture when Gandhi is sitting and talking to somebody else, he would always withdraw. He would be respectful of his distance. And because of that, what would happen, because he's working with one single lens, ki foreground mein all kinds of things would come into the foreground. And instinctively he used the foreground to frame the pictures, which was a very, very, at that time nobody did that, you know. It was a very modern way of composing things, but he was doing it instinctively. So it's very difficult to imagine this, that because we are told that intimacy comes only by being close. But he was able to be, his pictures are able to be intimate because he keeps a distance, which is very a contradiction in terms, but it actually makes sense to me. And that's why when I see these pictures, as if we were to not, I mean, just see Kanu Gandhi की photographer है, ये आज के modern context में बहुत कुछ सीखने को मिलता है इनके काम से, you know.
You know, one picture that for me is the most striking picture is the second last picture in this book. It's a picture where Kanu Gandhi was in Noakhali when Gandhi got assassinated.
Yeah.
He was sent there by Gandhi. Now, after Gandhi got assassinated, he must have come and taken pictures. Now, there's one picture. How do you take a picture of a man who is no more, who's got assassinated? How does one tell that story? Now, these are not the kind of themes that were really commonly tackled by the way Kanu Gandhi did. So he took a picture of the cloth, the white coarse cloth that Gandhi must have, you know, it must have been...
He died in that.
He died in that.
Yeah.
And then there are stains of blood, some stains. And I think that is a great way of depicting an assassination without being too graphic and when the person was not there. Now, my question would be, would he have done this having thought of it, or what would have gone into his mind?
I think by that time, we're talking about 1948, by that time he had become a documentary photographer. He was already in Noakhali, all the travels of Gandhi he was documenting. He was documenting the riots there. He was working almost like a professional photographer by that time. So when he comes back to Birla House and photographs the blood-stained cloth which is being held by Abba Gandhi and someone else, and then photographs the stone also with that hair arm and his own feet, he's consciously thinking as a photographer by that time. And I think he's using all his learned knowledge. And incidentally, उसके बाद उन्होंने photography बहुत कम की, almost gave it up, and he was here in Rajkot and, you know, with his ashram and did a few pictures, but more or less gave up photography उसके बाद and devoted himself to the movement.
Are there any pictures in the archives that is taken after Gandhi's?
A few, बहुत कम है.
What would those
be? Some visits by dignitaries, some other school staff, and लेकिन बहुत कम है, बहुत कम. No, and when we were talking about what we should be talking about, and I said, you know, I'd seen this work of Anuj's, and I said, you know, this is 1948, and now here is somebody, a photographer like Anuj, who's going back and photographing in the absence of a person, and a movement and a journey which was so important in our history. And it's a book I love, because we put up the exhibition together in Delhi, and I was able to see it even more closely then. So I wanted to ask him how you know, and I'm struck in this book by the research involved in actually tracing each step. And I wanted to ask you about the difficulty in trying to figure out how to approach. I mean, how did you first think about this subject?
I think it was around 2012 that I wanted to do a series with Gandhi as the central theme. And that was a random thought that I had. I didn't know how to go about things. I had just started photography. I started photography, taking photographs, I think, in about 2008 or 9. And so I thought that the best way to do is to know more about the man, have some information about him, and form an opinion, not just what I've heard and accumulated over the years. And so I started reading. And I was very particular about what I was to read, because I did not want anyone else's opinion when I read about the man. And fortunately, I can read Gujarati, so there's a lot of text that was available, people around Gandhi who had written about him. There's so much of text available which is not translated. So I had all access to that. And I started with Gandhi's own writing. And while I was going through this, I came across this book called On the Salt March. It's written by an Australian researcher. And in the early 80s, he retraced the entire route. Now, his journey was different because he wanted to do exactly what Gandhi had done. So he would start the day exactly the way the marchers had started. And then he would spend the night in most places where these marchers had spent the night. He would stop exactly where these guys had stopped. And then he wrote this entire narrative. So there's one historical trail, and then one about his own experiences. Now this was written in 1980, but the stories of the march, they are so dramatic that I got very curious. I wanted to see these places, whether these places existed or not, I don't know. And that is how that seed was planted. I think it was around 2018 or 17 when Vivek Bhai, he said that, let us do a book on Gujarat. So he had invited about 7-8 photographers, and all of us were given a very wide brief to do a 15-20 picture story on something to do with Gujarat. And that is when I said, I want to do this. Because I know this work, and, but I said that, I'll do the whole thing, and you can use whatever you wish to, because now I have a deadline. The deadline given was that of 1 year. And so I knew that if I have a deadline and a real purpose, then, I can. And that is when I started researching, because I think research was the main pillar on which this series could have been made. So I used 2-3 sources, but I went on reading this book again and again. I must have read it for about at least 60-70 times. And then I started making notes, and all my shoots were planned, because I knew that I would start from here, and it will take about 4 or 5 sites I can finish off till the light is good. So that is the way I would go on planning my trips. And in between 2 shoots, there would be a break. So that gave me time to review my pictures and again go back to my research. I would also make small notes, which I would carry with me. And before going to shoot a site, I would quickly go through what happened in these spaces. So for me, I knew exactly what had happened on this particular place before I went to shoot. So for someone who, that place could be just an empty room, but in my imagination, something very significant had happened here. There were quite a few problems, as you could imagine, because the text that I was referring to was at least 40 years old. And that was the latest literature that was available. So I had to use 2-3 sources to confirm what was there. In some cases, they might have mentioned a temple close by. Then I would also speak with the locals. Then I would look at the route, because Gandhi was a very logical man. So he wouldn't go out of the route even for 30 steps. He was like that. So all these combined, I would have to use my own judgment to confirm what had happened. And I think that was the real process.
But how were you, because the book is full of images where you're going to a place where something happened so many years back, but finding a trace of what happened at that time is very difficult. Yeah. So how were you thinking about, like you said, you might find an empty room. So what was your approach as a photographer to look at those spaces then, and what were you trying to do?
Whenever I would reach a site, I was not very eager to take out my camera and take pictures and go back. My process would be to spend as much time as I can on the site. Just get a feel of what is there, what this space is about, what is it asking me to do. And from my research, I would know that, it's all imagination. So you imagine that Gandhi would have come here, walked here, taken these steps, and placed his hand over this rail and gone there. Now, I knew the route from which Gandhi would have come. I knew where he slept, and everything else in between would be my imagination. And for that, I would require time to settle down. I would request the person accompanying me to leave me there and spend time and then take pictures.
So were you actually almost interpreting the work with the space? Yeah. Yeah, so this is, what I found interesting in this work also, and which I thought as a thing of what does documentary photography mean in today's world? Because we all used to this idea of a traditional kind of photojournalism, which approaches events, and here are non-events. In many of Kanu Gandhi's pictures also, they are non-events. There's nothing, there are some, but major events are not there. It's like two people maybe just talking, or him sitting by himself, And there is an approach to documentary photography which I think Anuj has used very well also here, which I think points to a practice that could be useful for all of us to think about, And secondly, in today's world, all this becomes a documentary which is a real life pictures, unchanged, also become part of art, which is an interesting crossover which was not happening before. And Kanu Gandhi's pictures are considered art now. I'm sure your prints are in that realm also, many of the images. So I'm quite intrigued by this turn that photography has taken. And I'm wondering whether you plan to do more of work like this.
It is interesting because while I was taking these pictures, there was absolutely no thought of creating art, because that thought itself is a big deterrent from the process. So one has to, I thought that it wouldn't work for me. I need a clear mind and just try to be true to my feelings, what I felt at that point of time on that space. Do that, go back home, review the pictures. That's about it. The other thing I must say that was on the back of my mind was Gandhi's writing in Gujarati. So it is quite remarkable what the man wrote, how he wrote, because it is in many ways against the grain of how Gujarati literature was being written back then. So there's minimum use of adjectives, is to the point. There's no sentimentality attached to it. Nothing. It's just, and now when you look, he was just communicating in the best possible manner. and he was trying to reach out to the masses. So that burden was not there on him to churn out literature. Now, I was also trying to figure out how could that translate into visuals.
Okay.
So, and I get very surprised when people respond to these pictures, because if you see, all these pictures are, they're very straightforward, very simple compositions, and there's no drama there. So
I think, just like you, I don't think Kanu Gandhi started, he didn't even think of himself as a photographer, forget about as an artist, you know. But the work, the proof of the pudding, I like to say, is when any work that is done transcends time, the time that was made for, and becomes eternal. I think that's the greater.
In a couple of trips, our friend Navroz was with me, and he was doing his own work. I was doing mine, and in the evenings we would, meet at the hotel, and we would have a drink or two. And before the first sip, he would always ask me, "Ke aaj ketla band baana photo padi aaya tame?" So how many pictures of closed doors have you taken? so that was, I think, the challenge to how to create a narrative that is interesting for people to see, and only if a narrative is interesting will people go back to it or read it. Now, there's something that I want to ask you about your recent work. You've taken so many pictures, you've done so many photo stories, and this work is kind of totally different from what we've seen of you. So can you tell us when you started this, what is it about? And
well, I think this same thing like what you said. I took the pressure off from myself of being a photographer. What happens with me is that I get tired of my own work. You do some work for some time and it has its own success, but then you get bored of it. So at that time, I always go back to my archive and start looking at the pictures and say, what is it that I've been doing, And I find threads in that, some things that I was in. So similarly, around 2010, 2011, I was going back and looking at all my pictures, and I found that there were these images of kind of vernacular imagery of India that I was always interested in. They were shot in 35mm format. Well, even as old as, like one of the earliest pictures in the show is from 1995. Because I would travel, I'd see something which was, and you were not trying to make that photograph as a big statement of anything, but you just found it subconsciously कि कुछ ये something जो मेरे को अच्छा लग रहा था. And therefore, when I started, I was looking कि अब आगे क्या करना चाहिए. So then, seeing these pictures, I decided that okay, maybe this is what I should do, and there were two things that happened at the same time. A photographer like me who's been working since the late 70s, 78 and 79, street बहुत कर लिया. Street करते करते, and in so many years in journalism, photographing the street becomes, after some time I could not go back, and I was saying, I'm shooting the same thing, I'm repeating what I've done so many years. So maybe there's another approach to it, because the street is still fascinating for me, There's another approach, and which is what these pictures started being. These things have started appearing out of thin air, and I said, I don't have to, this is not an assignment, I don't have to complete a task. Jo milta hai, mil gaya, photograph kar liya, walking around somewhere, going to buy milk, and I see something, I can photograph it. I'm going on an assignment, I can stop the car and see something. So that pressure coming off. And I was very interested in this kind of imagery of India. At the same time, all this thing of Indianisms, which all of you are familiar with, of the way that we speak English, many of us, all the phrases that we use, which are literal translations from our language. So those ideas started coming together. And that's how this work has been coming along. I mean, there's no plan. There was no plan. Now there's a plan that one has to finish it. after so many years.
Is it an ongoing project? You still take pictures?
Yeah, I still taking. I mean, I was till 5 days back I was shooting, you know, but I don't go consciously out to shoot for this. If I find something, I find something, you know. तो वही है, एक pressure जब उतर जाता है ना, तो आसान हो जाता है. Things become easy. I don't have to complete a deadline. I don't have to do anything. But right now I've set a target for myself that, you know, I will, now that I've shown this work, I will complete it. You know, कि कितने साल हो गए पता नहीं है. You know, 12 साल हो गए, तो must finish it now.
And one final question before we open the house for questions, and this is when I get to play some mischief. When you were working as a photojournalist in India today, you worked under Raghu Rai.
Yeah.
So please tell us how difficult it was. Give us some anecdotes, and I assure you, before it goes on the net, we'll edit it.
No,
but
you don't
give
need
us the true stories.
Yeah, you don't need to edit. So, I was working for Patriot newspaper, and I was hired by Raghu. He's seen my work and said, "Ki to aa jao." And it was typical of Raghu ki, I think Gaya mein Kal Chakra ho raha tha, I was walking along and he tapped me from behind. He said, "Maine Arun Puri se baat kar li, tum aa jao." You know, so main aa gaya. I went over and started working. It was actually fantastic, you know, to work with Raghu, not because of a couple of reasons. One, that he was a very hard taskmaster. We are talking about 1986, in the heyday of journalism, when, you know, India Today was this thick, and there were photo essays which were 12 pages, 16 pages long, and people were getting a chance to do that work. And Raghu was a star. He was a star in India Today also. So much so that nobody, including Arun Puri, the editor, would mess with him. Raghu ne kaha to, you know, so because of that, you know, even as we in the photo department as photographers enjoyed our status, though we were all underlings, because we had uske ek tarah ka ek haath tha na. So Raghu would even do things like, you know, he was working on that famous series of musicians. So he'd make the prints. Itna bada stack of prints would be lying on his table, and one of the editors would come and say, you know, we want to see. He said, "Nahi, abhi ready nahi hai." And they would touch it to look at it, and he'd slam his hand down and say, "Arey bola na, taiyar nahi hai, ja, baad mein dikhaunga." You know? So all that was very. So I think it was a very good time for us, you know, and it was because of that protection and that kind of status, that धाक, that जो कहते हैं ना धाक थी उसकी, हम लोग को बहुत अच्छा time मिला. But Raghu, as I've written in the, you know, we did 2 years back, Navajivan published my book, That Which Is Unseen, and I talk about, one of the stories I talk about that going to India Today, and Raghu had said when he read that कि अच्छा तुमने ऐसा लिखा था ठीक है, but you know, even my daughter said it is true, because he had a huge ego, you know, so that could be he could be really overbearing at that time. Lekin it worked for me, you know, I was a young photographer. You have an overbearing person to is driving us. Yeah, I guess in today it would have been a different matter, but you know, it was a good time. It was a good time for journalism, and I think I benefited from it.
So now I think we should open the house if anyone has questions.
I am following you since many years. Actually, I have seen your lot of works when you are with India Today, and then after you are with Outlook also. So, which of your assignment, you can say Sikh hai, then Kumbh Mela hai. So, which one is the most fascinating you? आपको किसमें सबसे ज़्यादा मज़ा आया था?
मज़ा कहना बड़ा मुश्किल रहता है, no, but significant होते हैं. And I think there are a number of assignments, and I think if you all have not seen that book which Navajivan has published, That Which Is Unseen, zarur dekhiega, because there is one story there which had a big impact on me, in terms of how I define myself as a photographer. And it's that story is called Rahi Be Padi. And it was to do with widows of the caste war in Bihar. And this was in 1996, 7. Yaad nahi aa raha exact dates, but there were two major massacres by the upper caste landlord army of Dalits in Jahanabad district in Bihar. One was Lakshmanpur Bathe, where 70 people were killed, and there was another one where we landed up a few days afterwards. And there was this young girl, 14-year-old girl, widow. She'd just been married. और उसकी जैसे होता है child marriage में कि marriage हुई, and then after the marriage she goes back immediately to her mother's house, which was few villages away, and then she comes back after some time to the village. And when she had gone back, when this Ranveer Sena people came and massacred 20 people there, 20, including her husband. And here she was back. And I'm telling a long story, but bear with me, And there was a reporter who was Sautik Biswas, who now is with BBC, and myself and another reporter from Patna, who's all from Outlook. And we was talking to this girl who was wrapped in a kind of a satin sari, completely terrified, sitting there, वो घर का जो आंगन होता है उसमें मिट्टी का लेप किया हुआ. And Sautik was asking her some questions. So one of the questions he asked कि अब आप क्या करेंगे, आप इधर रहेंगे कि वापस जाएंगे to, will you go back to your mother's house? And in Bhojpuri she said Rahi Be Padi, and that, which means literally translated means I'll have to stay. Now it can be interpreted as that, as I'll have to stay, which is the fatalistic answer जो हम लोग expect करते हैं. But actually it was not that. She said Rahi Be Padi. It was a question. It was a question because she was terrified. She didn't know what had happened. 14-year-old girl whose marriage has not been consummated. She's a widow already. She didn't know what was happening. And हम लोग all of us felt totally inadequate. Now as a photographer, I'm trying to photograph her. How can I ever, in my photograph, ever be able to convey the fear, the loss, or maybe it was not just, she may not even have been concerned with the loss, but the fear, the terror that she felt at what was happening to her and her life, There's no way to, so that made me really think, what is my approach going to be from now on, And that from that time I started a bit like Kanu Gandhi also, and a bit like started stepping back a bit more, and that stepping back helped, because there she was sitting right there. First I'd taken pictures close up, of her face, usual thing that some journalists karte hain, waiting for the tear to drop. Then I said, this is totally inadequate, and I stepped back, and then in that frame, just that figure of hers, and a boy walked in whose head was shaved, because जब कुछ death होती है तो head shave करते हैं, and there was a chessboard T-shirt with chess pieces on it, and it just made the picture, and I realized that this conveys much more, and is open to people to interpret. So I stopped being more direct in trying to be more step back, more reflective, more introspective in my work. So ऐसे बहुत से, कहने के लिए तो मजे लेने के लिए बहुत सारे stories हैं, but I think this was one of the most significant things that happened to me as a photographer.
सर, एक जर्नलिस्ट जहाँ फोटोग्राफी के लिए जाते हैं और एक आम इंसान जो है फोटोग्राफी के लिए जाते हैं, तो दोनों में एक सोच का डिफरेंस होता है कि जर्नलिस्ट जो है वो हर जगह पे एक्सेस मिल सकता है, वो जा सकते हैं, फोटोग्राफी कर सकते हैं. तो ये जो डर है आम फोटोग्राफरों में कि हम नहीं कर सकते या उनको अच्छा चांस मिलता है या वो अच्छी तरह से कर सकते, वो डर कैसे निकाले या ये सोच कैसे बदले?
ना आपको सच बताऊं, आजकल हम लोग अपना प्रेस कार्ड छुपा लेते हैं। प्रेस कार्ड इज अब लायबिलिटी है। पब्लिक से या किसी से पिटना, if you are not a press photographer, it might be even better. ठीक है, वो एक्सेस एक तरह का जो गवर्नमेंट एक्सेस वगैरह है वो मिल जाता है, बट पीपल अदरवाइज आर वेरी सस्पिशियस ना। और ये अफवाह और ये सब फेक न्यूज़ ये सब फैलाने से और भी हालत ख़राब हो गया। क्वाइट ऑफन मेरे पास प्रेस कार्ड है। आई एम बीन वर्किंग इन अयोध्या, शूटिंग अयोध्या एज अ टाउन फॉर अब 10 साल से कर रहा हूँ। मैं तो प्रेस कार्ड अपना छुपा देता हूँ, मैं कहता हूँ मैं अपने लिए कर रहा हूँ, मैं ऐसे ही कर रहा हूँ, अच्छा लग रहा है, ये देखने में अच्छा लग रहा है। मे बी बेटर ऑफ, सोच लीजिए, माइट बी बेटर ऑफ जस्ट बीइंग अ नॉर्मल फोटोग्राफर।
There is another incident that you had told me about. This was one of the incidents in Bihar that you had, but another very life-changing experience that you had when you were shooting the demolition of the Ayodhya mosque. Can you please tell us something?
Well, that was, I would not say life-changing, but it was important because, I mean, it started, when I started photography as professionally as a photojournalist was in about 1981-82. And agar aap dekho to my main, the first brush I had with major event was the 1984 Sikh Raj in Delhi. और उसके बाद से as a photographer and as a photojournalist, bar, all the time, it was communalism, communal conflict. That was the core of what I was doing. And we were confronting that. That period in India's history is well known, and it continues up till many, many years, even now. That is continuing, and that has defined sort of modern day India. There's communal conflict actually has defined the character of our nation in a way. But Ayodhya was such a one. I was with India Today, and India Today had 3 teams of journalists, and one journalist, one photographer, following the 3 main leaders, Murli Manohar Joshi, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, and Advani, in the run-up to the Babri Masjid demolition. And all 3 of us were assigned to these leaders and following for about 2-3 days, because they were all taking yatras to reach Lucknow on the 5th of December 1992. And after that, all of them were supposed to go to Ayodhya for the 6th December to perform a symbolic car seva, because they had given an assurance to the Supreme Court कि कुछ नहीं होगा, symbolic car seva होगा और आगे कुछ नहीं होगा. So I was assigned with another reporter to Yuvraj Ghimre to follow Advani, and that was my brief, and that's how following him, I landed up then, in Lucknow, and Lucknow में वो बड़ी सी meeting हुई on the 5th of December. But instead of the other people also going, Advani ran quickly to Ayodhya because things had gone out of control, and that one got the sense of that. Vajpayee went back to Delhi because he was in Parliament the next day, as you all know history-wise. Murli Manohar Joshi went back, and so Yuvraj and I landed up, and because I was following Advani, I landed up at the जो कार सेवा का एक जहाँ पर मस्जिद और मंदिर था, उसके सामने एक चबूतरा था where the car seva was supposed to take place, and all the photographers and camera crews were there, and the Ram Katha Kunj जहाँ पर stage बना था वो थोड़ी दूर था उसके, and that's where Advani was going. So मैं Advani के साथ आया, and I went up and I was on Ram Katha Kunj. I was the only photographer there, and as you all know, the moment the time came at 11 something or the other, time जो था, all the photographers, as soon as the car seva started, all the photographers were beaten up, their cameras were smashed, they were stopped from taking photographs, and that's why जो actual assault जो है उसका first about 45 seconds, 1 minute का pictures आपने देखा होगा, उसके बाद कुछ नहीं है. But up there on the Ramkatha Kunj, I was there and I was able to photograph all throughout. Now, I could not see the down. I could only see 2 of the domes, and one dome was partially covered by trees. So I kept my cool and kept on shooting. और मुझे कुछ नहीं कहा क्योंकि people thought I was with Advani, so I must be one of the VHP photographers or something. But that was a traumatic day for all of us, you know, क्योंकि as the press was completely shattered. In fact, बाद में शाम को people started coming, you know, turning up at the Ramkatha Kunj without their cameras and looking, some of them beaten up. There were 2 other friends who were, including Raghu's son, who was trapped by the mob and then rescued by a policewoman. So, and raat mein we were going to hospitals looking for our colleagues. So that was quite a difficult period for us, you know, but it also made me think about what is this place, Ayodhya, you know, which हमारे सबके imagination में is the thing that caused so much from 1992 till, you know, so many years. It has been the root cause of all the trouble in this country, you know. But so I went back to Ayodhya in 2002 on the 10th anniversary, and I said, "Chalo, I'll go again without any assignment, no brief, no." I said, "I'll go and just wander around this city and photograph it," and that's when I started an engagement with Ayodhya long term, and I'm been photographing the city because it's a quiet place. जहाँ पर की life अपने, it's like, that's why I call it the eye of the storm. कि eye of the storm is quiet. The storm is everywhere else. वहाँ पर कुछ नहीं है. वहाँ पर लोग बड़े शांति से फुटवर्क रहते हैं. In fact, हमारे imagination में बड़ा खतरनाक से जगह है, but actually it is not. So anyway, that's a long. Sorry, I tell 2 long stories. So
we'll take one final question. The lady at the back, please.
I'm Darshana. I wanted to find out about your 8 Sutra book in 2008.
Okay.
Having managed program in Maharashtra and Bhopal and Madhya Pradesh, I'm witness of the book, and I'm really I'm really anxious to know about what motivated you to write, because those days it was a very taboo, and for us, 8 Sutra was a kind of, you know, guideline working and managing Avahan program with us.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear this.
And I'm really fascinated by that book. So I just wanted to see your reaction and, you know, what motivated you to do that book?
I was assigned for that book, but I must tell you, in, around 2004, I was already trying, you know, to move into the development sector to photograph, because I felt that जो traditional journalism हम जो कर रहे थे newspapers वगैरह में, the scope of working on all the subjects and issues that I've been interested in was being left behind. So, and the Gates Foundation happened just then, and I had gone to meet Ashok Alexander and for Avan, and he said, "We are doing our programs, why don't you come and photograph that?" And I started working with photographing the whole HIV/AIDS epidemic, and it was a very, very difficult time because, you know, consents, how to approach this without revealing identities. I would go to communities of sex workers who were very happy to be photographed, but the photograph could not be published. So, you know, it was...
Unless and until there is a consent from them.
So consent had to be...
Right.
So by 2006 or so, the Gates Foundation decided to commission some writers to go and write about the AIDS epidemic in India and choose different subjects. And they were all big writers. Yeah. And because I had been working on the subject for such a long time, I was given a chance to travel with each of them. Can you imagine getting a chance to go with Salman Rushdie, to go with Mukul Keswan, to go with, you know, Siddharth Dev in the Northeast and photograph? I mean, as a chance kahan milte hain, you know? But that's how that book came about. I was going and photographing. So sometimes, like with Rushdie, I went and met this transgender leader, Lakshmi, in Bombay. But he went back, and then I went and spent a day with her and photographed her. Aman Sethi and I made a trip from Siliguri to Patna on a truck to see what the lives of truck drivers were. So, yeah, for me, that was a great work that I could able to do. And I mean, I still do, majority of my work is with non-profits, and I can tell you I'm very thankful for that work. You
Absolutely. Having work and manage Avahan program, I think for us, that book was a Bible, or for Gita. You know, we very often we talked about that book to our, red light areas and, translate into local languages. So they were very happy, and I just wanted to echo their feeling.
No, thank you for asking that, because, very few people know that I've ever worked on that book,
No, but it's an amazing book that it's been done. Congratulations.
I think on that note, we should end this session, because the speakers for the next session are
Ready
peeping from behind the doors. So thank you, everybody.
Yeah.